Do all narcissistic relationships end the same? Like what you're talking about, I guess, is pretty scary stuff for people when they're like entering a relationship, they're in a relationship, they're like, oh no, I want to make sure that I'm not with somebody who's like this. Is there degrees of narcissistic relationships where not all of them will end up like in this crazy toxic situation that you're talking about?
There are a couple of things. We're all alike and we're each unique. We all have the possibility for some anger and agitation and ending relationships poorly, but we're each unique in the way it plays out. And so sometimes narcissists seem to all be reading from the same playbook, but other times the circumstances and the combinations of relationships are so unique that they don't end the same. For example, let's suppose that you've been married to someone and it's like, I got to get away from this person. That person's too controlling and overbearing and manipulative, but you have 3 kids with that person. And so I'm going to end formally my role with that person, but it's not going to be the same as someone who has a 2-year relationship. And so we just decided to part ways and one moves to the other side of the country. Well, that's going to be different. So circumstances and people and commonalities can certainly have a lot of a say as to, how well or how easy or how smoothly or not it's going to be. If you have, for example, if you have financial interactions with each other, that's more difficult as opposed to you just go your own separate ways. So there's so many factors that are there that we can't say that there's one fixed way that it ends. But typically you can guarantee one thing, and that is the narcissist is going to typically hold you in low regard. Like, well, all I know is you're an idiot and you're stupid. And if I had some things that were wrong with me, yeah, okay, maybe I didn't do everything right, but your mama wears army boots, you're worse. And so that's how they think as a general rule.
You've talked about like the narcissists don't do well with rejection. They don't do well with conflict. They don't do well when you express yourself. Is a good metric, I guess, for somebody in a relationship is like, okay, when you bring your partner something that bothers you, how do they respond? Are they receptive? Are they like, I understand where you're coming from? And that's, I guess, if they say stuff like that, that's typically a good sign.
Spot on. There's this one lady that I counseled with, and I had walked her through a divorce, and she was like 50-ish, something like that. And her ex-husband was the poster boy. I mean, he had been accomplished in his profession, and he had money, and so that just augmented his whole thought about, hey, I've proven that I am the best, and you need to just shut up and listen to me. Very insensitive and all the rest, and anger all the way. So they wind up getting a divorce. And about 3 or 4 later, she starts dating this fella, and she came in to talk with me about some of that. Her comment was, whenever I try to talk with him about something that's frustrating me, he listens, and then he asks follow-up questions. Well, help me understand what I'm not picking up on, or what is it that you're wanting me to know? And I keep waiting for him to yell at me, and I keep waiting for him to tell me how idiotic I am. And it doesn't happen. And I started laughing, and we were chuckling together. It's like, yeah, your grid is set towards that narcissist so strongly that when someone comes along and has a pretty healthy way of life, it's like, I don't know what to do with that. This is a little different than what I thought it might be. And I just explained to her, well, the good news is that's a nice problem to have. And so just continue on. And if you're still able to talk about those kind of things with decent results, then what that tells me is you got a winning situation. Sometimes you've been so acclimated to the narcissistic way that later on when you're going into something different, old tunes start coming out of your mind. And it's like, well, are we going back to the same old song, 80th verse? So yeah, you just have to be objective about what you're seeing.
How do you get somebody to not sabotage something new like that when they're used to like toxicity? Like, what advice do you have for them?
When you've been through a toxic relationship, and that could be in dating and cohabitation or marriage, it could be, let's say, your brother used to be awful when you were a kid, or you had relations with your parents. You need to have enough of a sense of self-awareness about what you've been through and what it's done to you, and disclose it. As you're getting to know one another, and it's 6 months into it, or a year into it, or 3 years in, you need to be very willing to say, I know what my trigger points are, and I want you to call me out when you see that happening, and you talk about it. For example, let's suppose you have a woman whose father was extremely overbearing to the point of ruining holidays and making the kids cry and all of that. And then she winds up marrying a guy who's the exact opposite, but he turns out to be a passive aggressive covert narcissist where he won't say anything and is not at all open and no accountability whatsoever, just very non-cooperative. And so she's got two ends of the spectrum. And then she meets another person. Now it's like, well, I don't really know which end is up. And so if that relationship is to move forward, then there needs to be a lot of discussion. Here's my confusion, the gaslighting. Here's what I want to have happen. Here's what I see my contributions being. Tell me about yours. And when you can have that openness and that discussion, kind of like that lady that wound up being with the good guy after her disastrous husband, and that's an ongoing thing, and there's a real sense of safeness, and you have confirmation from other individuals who will have similar responses, you're probably in a good place. And so that's why I say just be patient in the recovery process. Be patient as you're entering into new relations, whatever the nature of that relation might be. And don't feel like this has to be the end all be all relationships. Just kind of take it as it comes and just let time be your healer and give yourself plenty of time.
You hear the saying, sometimes we look for love in all the wrong places. And I feel like when people get out of a toxic relationship, that's like something that's in their mind is like, I looked for love in all the wrong places. And then they're hearing what you've shared where, you had your client who's like sharing like, oh, this guy actually listens to me. Like when I actually express myself, he's not yelling at me or attacking me or judging me or whatever the previous person would have done. And it's like, oh, like I'm sure people who have been in a toxic relationship that are listening to this or watching this, like, I need to find that. Like, I want that. What's the in between? Like you talked about obviously going to therapy and doing the deep rooted work on yourself when you get out of a toxic relationship like that. But what else needs to occur, in your opinion, to get yourself ready for a healthy relationship?
It's hard to find healthy relationships if all you know is unhealthy. I'm hoping that if you've got a history where you've been used or mistreated, that you can look and say, but the good news is I have some serious positive relationships with same gender people or people inside my family or at work where we really do have a good synergy. Because if you have almost nobody that you can say that about, then my question is, well, is there something about your picker then that is just way off base? The way I say is the best way to find a good person that's going to be in love with you is just have a bunch of folks that you like and that like you, and that it's a long-standing kind of thing. Because when you know that you have had relationships where you do have that self-disclosure and that mutuality that I'm talking about and clean conflict resolution, and the skill set is there, and you rehearse and practice the skills necessary, then when those new people come along, then you've got something to draw upon. Narcissists are very empty on the inside. All they know is dominance and power games and all like that. But when you have a full measure of relationships with people that know how to empathize and share and compromise, lift up one another and offer worth and dignity, etc., then that gives you an experience base that you can draw from. And by the way, one thing on that, narcissists often have a way of isolating you. They don't want you around those people. It's like, no, I want to be the final word. And so that's why it's so necessary for you to get out there and have a broad array, as much as you're able, of people that you can actually have some trust with.
You talked about like sometimes how narcissists like shut down and they don't communicate. I mean, I think people can hear that and be like, well, I don't think I'm a narcissist, but I have a hard time communicating. Maybe I'm avoidant in certain ways, or I don't know how to formally express myself. Like, what's the difference between somebody who just very conflict avoidant and isn't like the best maybe at communicating and somebody who's a narcissist?
Keep in mind, there is no such thing as no communication. Let's suppose that you asked me a question, hey, Les, what do you think about such and such? I don't have anything to say. And then I change the subject, or I get up and walk out of the room. I'm communicating. If you've got someone that tends to do that, then I'm going to want to slow that person down. It's like, let's break this down. I noticed that when I ask you questions, you just kind of go into this evasive mode, or you don't have anything to say, or you shut down and you don't return calls for 2 days. I'd like to know what that's about. And if we're going to continue in our relationship, let's see if we can hash this out. So it's like you're communicating something. And it might be they're communicating, I don't like you, or I'm afraid, or I have some memories that have been triggered. Well, then let's talk about that. And so, and then if the person just says, I can't, well, I'm going to work with you some, but if you repeatedly go back to that, but I can't do that, then eventually I'm going to believe that. It's like, oh, Maya Angelou, when they show you who they are, believe it, and it's like, well, that's good to know because I put too high of a premium on having that openness. For the person that says, well, I'm just not that kind of a person, well, you can be that kind of a person that says, I want to share myself. And I could give some good illustrations of that where it may be a little awkward, but I know this one guy that was always a pretty close guy. And he, from time to time, he would say something, and I knew that it was his way of saying, "Hey, Les, I can be vulnerable with you." I'd let him know, thanks for sharing that with me, because I know that's not natural for you, and it makes me feel honored that you would want to do that with me. And so when people can say, "Yeah, sometimes I'm a bit bashful or I'm a bit reluctant to share," but then when they make adjustments, then it's like we're going to put that in the positive category. If they can do that more and more, then we've got ourselves a winning combination. If they just won't go there, then it's like, well, I choose not to. I choose not to grow. And it's like, good to know.
Right. Because it all comes down to self-awareness. I think like if the person is self-aware about their shortcomings, because we all have flaws. I mean, I think we all have stuff we're working on, whether it's in our careers, personal relationships, or relationship with ourselves. I just think it comes down to self-awareness and like, okay, am I going to put forth the effort to work on this? I know it's going to take some time. But I think the difference, at least from what I'm understanding, is a toxic person is just oblivious to any of it or acts like they're oblivious.
There's actually a good book out on the market. It's relatively new. David Brooks, he's a political commentator. It's about, the title is How to Know a Person. It has nothing to do with politics, but he began writing saying, I began realizing that I'm not the kind of person that is easily known, nor do I want to care. I've had a history of not particularly caring because I'm a journalist and I do facts and all that. And he made some super adjustments thinking I can do better than that, because ultimately life is about relationships, and it's all about how to really start knowing people and what kind of adjustments can be made. And so, there are some individuals it's like, I'm going to take that on as a project. And in his case, he researched and started writing a book about it, and he shared his own personal experiences. When you have that, then we can go somewhere.
Is there anything that you've like learned or seen in your own experience with all of this, that if there's like, something that somebody says, something that somebody does, you should immediately run? Like, for example, if you're in a restaurant with somebody and you see how they treat the wait staff, or if somebody comes right out the gate and says something to you, like anything that comes to mind on that?
Yeah, well, actually, it is kind of interesting. You can tell a lot about a person by the way that they handle people that aren't necessarily in a significant role, like the wait staff. Although they're working hard, give them credit. Okay, I'm one of these that says I want to try as best I can to be consistent in my kindness or in my understanding and my encouragement. If it's the janitor at the building that I work, if it's the kid that's out riding their bike in the neighborhood, if it's my mother-in-law, if it's somebody that I socialize with, as best I can, I don't want to be a chameleon. What you see is what you get. I want to just have a kindness and goodness, and it's just going to be there. And narcissists, they're constantly, trying to maneuver and figure out where they can get their angle. And healthy individuals like, I don't need angles. All I want to do is just let you know. I want to know you. I want you to know me, and I want to be kind. You take the characteristics that we listed right at the top of our conversation: control, selfishness, phoniness, and look at all the opposites. I want you to feel free. I want you to be safe when you're in my presence. I want you to feel like you walked away feeling like you were understood. And I want there to be a sense of equality here between you and me. And when that's a consistent message, then we know you're onto something and you're moving far away from that narcissistic pattern. Good for you. And that we say, that person gets it.
Last thing I wanted to cover was, you brought up the chameleon thing. I know that's mirroring, I believe. Yeah. When they enter in a relationship and they're like, essentially whatever you say, they say, like, it's all like they're trying to like essentially get you to fall in love with yourself, if I understand it correctly. What is mirroring and how long does that typically last?
Well, actually, you have mirroring. For example, if let's say you tell me I like to play tennis, and I say, tennis, me too. I'm not very good at it, but tell me about what you like to do, mirroring. So I pick up on that. It's like I got myself an in. Or you have another thing that's very similar to that. It's what we refer to as dark empathy. For example, if you say, I had a really difficult relationship, I found myself very disappointed because this, that, and the other happened. And so dark empathy can be an effort to say, well, I know that must have hurt you. Tell me what that was all about, and what led up to it. And it's like, wow, this person's into it. Only later on for you to find that all of that interest or that curiosity is little more than a ruse, because they continue to go back to their bossiness, or let's say later on, they'll use what you disclosed against you. I know about how you do relationships. Remember when you told me about that relationship that fell apart? And they bring it up and they use it as a hammer against you. And so it's nice when somebody offers those pleasant ingredients. But then we go back to our word patience. The first sign that you have something good, don't necessarily take that in an all or nothing kind of way that says, well, everything's wonderful then. Let time show you, what they're going to do with it and how they're going to manage it. Now, some narcissists are so good at that you won't know until 3 or 4 years into it. By then, you may be way committed. So, unfortunately, we can't safe-proof it all the way around, but you can at least do your own due diligence as much as possible. And I can't emphasize enough, patience, patience, patience before you get all the way into heavy commitments with people.
What do you classify as a heavy commitment? Like marrying somebody or moving in with somebody?
Yeah, or going into business, or all of a sudden, we've known each other for 3 weeks and we're each other's best friend, and stuff like that. Let it build a little bit more organically.
Les, anything else you'd like to add on anything we've talked about regarding narcissism that you think is really important?
First, Doug, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the questions you have. The key here is let's look at 2 different words: skepticism and cynicism. What you and I are doing here is we're kind of taking a skeptic's approach towards the whole question of narcissism. And what that means is we're trying to weigh things out objectively. Cynicism means you're observing someone with a built-in pessimistic angle. Like, I'm going to find out what's wrong with you so that I can either clobber you with it or I can use it against you, something like that. And so you want to have a healthy skepticism, but you don't want to go into harsh pessimism. And then just see if that other person can work with you. Yeah, I'm feeling you. You're feeling me out. And that's okay. And then over time, the reason to be skeptical begins to wane. That's how trust builds. You have a sense of openness, a willingness to be out there and to be vulnerable. Narcissists can't be vulnerable, or if they do, it's fake and it's only for a short period of time. Know that you're the best person who's going to be in the take charge of you committee. Nobody's going to care for me quite as good as I'm going to care for me. Make that a priority.
I mean, do you believe the saying, once somebody shows you who they are, believe them? Or do you believe that sometimes people are just nervous as they enter in relationships?
I'm not going to be so hard and fast that I can't cut somebody some slack. If somebody comes on pretty strong with some harsh, hateful kind of stuff pretty early, and then they come back and say, hey, wait, I was just having a bad day. It's like, well, I'm storing that away. So I lean towards what they start showing you, particularly if it's conflict, then you're seeing it.
Well, Les, this has been amazing. I know my audience is going to really, really enjoy this conversation. If people want to connect with you, if they want to watch your content on YouTube, where's the best place to do that?
I got survivingnarcissism.tv, surviving narcissism on YouTube, Instagram, all that. That's all under the title of Surviving Narcissism. Look it up. I hope they get some good benefit out of it.